Hello once again, everyone, and welcome to our combined Sunday school classes, the Agape class and the Young Men's Bible class from First Presbyterian Church here in Greensboro. I'm Lane Ridenhour, and I thank you for joining us once again as we gather together for study and worship on this, the fourth Sunday of Easter, Sunday, April 26th. In just a few moments, our Sunday school teacher, Sandie Gravett, will be joining us as she continues her new video series, From Bondage to Covenant, Exodus, and Becoming a Resurrection People, a fascinating series that explores the early church's model for Eastertide, those 50 days between Easter and Pentecost. In our sanctuary service this week, the Reverend Jill Duffield will be speaking on earth care, which is also appropriate as Thursday of this week we observed Earth Day, the largest secular observance in the world. Over 1 billion people mark this date every year, including many Christian communities here in the United States, to demonstrate support for environmental issues. You can find a link to our Sunday service and our Sunday Bulletin online at our website, fpcgreensboro.org. For our hymn this morning, I've chosen a hymn that was written to praise the various beauties of the earth, the things that we encounter in our everyday lives but often fail to appreciate. The beauty of the earth and the skies, the beauty of each hour, the joy of ear and eye, the joy of human love, and it also expresses thanksgiving for the church and for Christ. For the Beauty of the Earth was written in 1864 by Folliot S. Pierpoint. He was a classical scholar and a poet who lived near Bath, England. He was overwhelmed with the beauty of the countryside near his home, and he wrote this beautiful poem, along with the refrain after each verse, "Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise." I'll put the words up on the screen for you as usual and invite you to sing along with me as we give thanks for all the beauty around us. For the Beauty of the Earth.
For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the wonder of each hour of the day and of the night, hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of light. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of ear and eye, for the heart and mind's delight, for the mystic harmony, linking sense to sound and sight. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child, friends on earth and friends above, for all gentle thoughts and mild. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise.
In our series on the wilderness wandering and becoming resurrection people, we come today to a text that I have long found instructive when we are facing challenges and may be a little bit afraid of the circumstances and what might come next. Let me set the scene for us. We remember that there had been the events of the Passover night, the angel of death moving through the land and killing all the Egyptian firstborn. We recall that the Egyptians had pushed out the people of Israel in the middle of the night. Some days later, the narrator tells us that Pharaoh and the Egyptians have decided to come out after the people. Now, as we have seen in lessons before, there are a couple of versions of the story, including one here where the king of Egypt just learns about the departure of this people. I don't want to get lost chasing down why the story may be told with these kinds of details. I simply want to call your attention to the fact that in this passage, chariots and armies, all the military might of Egypt, is pursuing the people. It is quite an array. And I want you to note that it is because Israel is described as going out with a high hand. Here in the New Revised Standard Version, it reads boldly. The implication is that there has been an affront to the Pharaoh and to the Pharaoh's power, and that affront is one of the reasons that this display of force is necessary. It's aiming to give that affront a response. But where I really want to pick up is with how the people of Israel are reacting to this set of circumstances, because it is at that place we get insight into mentalities that we ourselves can adopt. It is, in my mind, guidance for us on our journey as resurrection people. The text I want to call your attention to opens in Exodus 14:10 with this notice, and again I'm in the New Revised Standard Version. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and there were the Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. This text intrigues me for reasons that may not be obvious in English. Here's several reasons why, and I want to look at each of them separately. First off, you have often heard me say that in Hebrew, subjects typically come after the verbs. Here's a famous example. Bereshit bara Elohim. It literally reads, in the beginning, he created God. Well, we know that God is not the object of this text. God is the subject. So even though the subject appears after the verb, we say in English, in the beginning, God created. But in this text in Exodus, we get something different. Uparo hikriv. And Pharaoh, he drew near. What I want you to see is that Pharaoh comes first. Even more, the Israelites' response is not exactly what Exodus 14:10 says here in the New Revised Standard Version translation. It literally says, and the people of Israel lifted up their eyes. It is as if they suddenly saw something they had not seen when their eyes were focused elsewhere. And what do they see? I'm showing you my translation on the right-hand side here. They don't see Pharaoh, but the text says they see Egypt marching or setting out or journeying after them. I call your attention to all of these elements because each one is important. Let's take that Pharaoh coming first. He looms large, the writer is telling us, in the minds of the people. Pharaoh here is representative of the most powerful force the people have ever known, a figure that is godlike in their minds. Don't cast too much blame on them. It would be easy to forget to think of Pharaoh as a human being because what he represents is power. Power over a country and its people, over monumental structures like the pyramids, and over a military that is now bearing down on them. And this is a power that had been enforced over the people in terms of labor and production and status, and had told the people who they were for as long as they could remember. The Pharaoh is Egypt in their minds. Thus, when the people lift up their eyes from their camp, they don't see Moses and they don't see God as much as they see Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is Egypt, and Egypt is coming after them with a full complement of military might. Not surprisingly then, it's terrifying. There's a reminder right here that the community in the wilderness may have been experiencing some degree of freedom, and they may have been with a God who had demonstrated power when they were back in Egypt. But this people is not yet settled into any new kind of life, and it is not yet in an extended relationship with this God. It is therefore Pharaoh and all that Pharaoh represents that still dominates their minds and evokes fear. I want us to take a minute to appreciate that fear. In some ways, we could tie it to the fear of an abused spouse who has finally left home and gotten out from a situation that was harmful in every way. On the one hand, there is much to celebrate, but the mindset of fear doesn't dissipate like magic once the person is out of the environment that was hurting them. It is not at all uncommon to still be looking over one's shoulder for some time to come, and it is not unusual to have long-term psychological effects. PTSD is the term that we use for that ongoing impact. Even if the situation we find ourselves in is not quite this dire, we can still find points of contact to relate to the people's experience. For instance, when most of us are in times of transition, when we are out of our accustomed places and routines, we not only can, but frequently do feel vulnerable and afraid. It might be moving to a different city, or taking on a new job, or handling an unexpected health crisis. One of the reasons that any of these things can be frightening is not knowing what might be ahead. Another is self-doubt. What is out there for me? Am I making the right decisions? Am I capable of handling what needs to be done? We are out of our familiar, and that means outside of the things that make us feel secure and steady, even if we understand that that security is always illusory. Let me give you a quick example. I have a friend who is thankfully 7 or 8 years beyond a breast cancer diagnosis and grateful to have survived. But she was telling me not too long ago about how hard it is to go every year for her checkup, because the year that cancer happened, everything had seemed so normal. A routine mammogram, followed by well, let's take a closer look, but there are no real worries. Followed by, it's small and it looks manageable, but let's run an MRI just to be sure about what we're seeing. Followed by, well, you have another spot in the other breast, but we don't think that that is anything. Followed by, well, it's cancer too. Followed by surgery on both. Followed by, we got it, but there's also a lymph node. Followed by, we have to do chemo and then radiation. For her, every step, the news felt worse, and it displaced her sense of normal. It shook her confidence in her body. And now, even though she is completely grateful that they were able to catch it early, that they were able to do many interventions that left her with her life and her health, and she has learned a lot about herself and taking care of her needs and appreciating what she has, she still sometimes feels the fear. This is not unlike the Exodus story, because it is one of those liminal moments, those in-between times when we sometimes have to realize that there is nothing holding us steady, grounding us, except what we have inside. And it can be a test, a challenge to see if we can take those next steps. It can make us afraid. Something the writer Maya Angelou once said gives me a frame here. She wrote, "The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned." I like this thought because Dr. Angelou is reminding us that we long for places where we are at ease with who we are, where we know what our days will bring, and that we feel confident that we can manage to find a way through. The question she holds out for us, however, is what home consists of. Is it a physical place? The people in Exodus are having to ask that question. Let me show you what I mean. The passage in Exodus 14 is the first time that we have heard anything out of the mouths of the people since way back in chapter 5 of the book. And those words were not from the people themselves, but from their supervisors. At this point in the story, you might remember that the people, after Moses and Aaron, had just begun going to Pharaoh and asking to let the people go. Well, these people had been forced to increase their workload in order to make certain that they didn't have time or space or energy to think about anything else but work. And even more, the Pharaoh had directed that the supervisors were to receive beatings because the people weren't making their quotas. Thus, those supervisors, when they ran into Moses and Aaron, had something to say to them. "The Lord look upon you and judge. You have brought us into a bad odor with the Pharaoh and with his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." In this passage, Moses and Aaron were seen as the ones who were disrupting the status quo of the people, shaking up their lives and their work, and bringing them into conflict with the powers that be. Their interference in the people's lives and their demands to let the people go were making things worse for the people of Israel, not better. It's not unlike the sentiment coming out of the mouths of the people of Israel in Exodus chapter 14. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Isn't this the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone, and let us serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." To their minds, life in Egypt was painful and difficult, and they were crying out to the Lord God for relief. Still, Egypt was the home they knew. Moreover, in that place they understood who and what they were: servants, slaves. It might not have been much of an identity, but it placed them in the world in a way where they knew their duties and obligations, and it defined their expectations. They had a solid grasp on what they had to accomplish every day. Even though the Pharaoh and the Egyptians could make their lives difficult through constant and sometimes increasing demands, it felt, at least on some level, manageable. They were not, as in this passage, in the middle of nowhere wandering around with no identity and no purpose that they could discern. At this moment, they might be free, but what did that mean? An army was coming after them. They had nothing with which to fight, and even if they had weapons, what match would this ragtag intergenerational bunch be for a trained fighting force? Out here, apart from anything, it was not the taskmasters and work and perhaps an occasional beating that they knew how to handle. They saw Egypt coming, and to them that meant death. To their minds, everything coming to a close in the middle of nowhere, even if one was on the road to freedom, was a worse outcome than enslavement. I am taken back to John 20 and to the disciples. But this time we are not at the tomb in the morning. It is evening of the same day. Some of them have seen the empty tomb, but only Mary Magdalene has encountered the risen Jesus. And her words about it, apparently, did not move the rest of them all that much, because the text tells us something about where they were in verse 19a. They are behind locked doors. They're not celebrating that the tomb is empty. They're not celebrating that Mary saw the risen Lord. They are not feeling empowered by this turn of events. Why not? Maybe it's because they had come to the city in triumph. They had thought they were coming into power. And then, in the blink of an eye, it had all gone south. Jesus had been arrested, tried, crucified. They may have been wondering if the same authorities who came after him would be looking for them. Or maybe they were thinking if they went around telling stories like the one Mary was telling, they may arouse such negative interest again. The words Moses speaks to the people who come to him in Exodus are telling both in the Exodus story and in this situation of the disciples as well. I want to take Moses' response phrase by phrase. First, there are 3 imperatives back to back. Do not be afraid comes first. Easier said than done, right? Fear is a fundamental human reaction to an unfamiliar or threatening situation. Fight or flight. Our bodies hype us up to react. I'm going to read this first phrase more as calm down or take it easy. Breathe might be another option. The command is more slow down and give it a minute. And next, well, here's the verb, hityatzvu. It's an imperative that means set or station yourself. Take your stand. It's asking you to be solid and not to cower. We might say something like, gather yourself. Most of us can recognize that panic moment, the moment when we are ready to plunge off the deep end as the world spins around us. This verb is right there saying, buckle up and get ready for the ride. It is a call to steadiness. But there's still one more action the people are asked to take. See the salvation of the Lord. Their job is to stop and to recognize what is happening right before their eyes. Henry David Thoreau gives me some words for the moment. He said, the question is not what you look at, but what you see. Clearly, in Exodus, what the people were focused on was an army bearing down on them. What Moses asked them to do is to open their eyes and see something else altogether. I want to jump back to John 20 for a minute. In that house, locked away, the text tells us Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Jesus was letting them know that the work of salvation had been accomplished, that he had done his job. Do you remember what the last words of Jesus were on the cross according to the writer of John? They were, "It is finished," or "It is accomplished." God had done something, and we did not have to do anything other than see it. It is not unlike how the words of Moses continue in Exodus 14. "For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again." That is, what you are seeing in your head right now, the power and the might of your oppressors, that's about to be broken once and for all, and you are going to be free of them forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you will stay silent. The people are being asked here to recognize where and how God is moving. That's it. There is nothing more that they have to do. Now you might have noticed I put a Hebrew word in the corner there because the translation in the NRSV is different. This is my translation. The New Revised Standard Version says, "And all you have to do is stay still." But the verb here, charash, is to be silent, dumb, or speechless. And I like my translation better because it responds back to the first of the passage when they were asking, "Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you had to bring us out here to die?" Right here, Moses is telling them that their job is not to express doubt, but to be quiet enough not to voice the first thought that pops into their head when trouble arises. They need to be silent, get focused, and see what is happening in front of them. It reminds me of Jesus's "Peace be with you" to the disciples in John 20. It is a message of calm, a reminder that things are not proceeding in ways that they fear that they are proceeding. But there's a little bit of a dangerous edge to this tale that I have to mention before we close. These passages are not invitations to passivity. That is, the passages are not all about waiting for God to do all of the heavy lifting and taking no responsibility for doing anything. That would be a rather fatalistic turn. It would be saying, well, it's all about God and nothing that we do matters. That is not the message here at all. These passages are all about courage. Let me draw the outline for you. In his book-length poem, The Age of Anxiety, the poet W.H. Auden sums up what is typically human when he writes, "We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die." Auden is telling us that we can too often lack the courage to stand strong with open eyes and take on what is before us. We would rather shrink back into captivity or lock ourselves behind doors as opposed to seeing where and how God is fighting on our behalf. We can all too easily miss that the battle might not always be won by the strongest, or that the cross is not an ending. And when we miss those things, we might miss seeing the movement of God. Maybe that movement of God is in the first neighbor who says hello when we are in a new location, or the first success in a new position, or in the community of friends who rallies around us when we face a health emergency. The word here is don't be afraid. Take your stand. See. God is fighting for you. All you have to do is open your eyes and realize it, and take courage from that knowledge and move forward. You have the resources within you. This is how you walk the liberation road. This is how you walk the resurrection road. Thank you for your time, and I'll look forward to continuing the series with you next week.